Hi, guys. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Non-Typical Project. Today's episode is sponsored by Denny Dennis Sporting Goods. They're my local hometown archery shop that I've been going to for years. They've got top-of-the-line gear and even better people. So if you ever find yourself in the St. Louis, Missouri, or surrounding areas, be sure to swing on in, check them out, and tell them I sent you. Especially if you've got a blown-up compound or crossbow, their archery techs absolutely love that kind of work. So without any further ado, let's get straight into the episode. All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the Non-Typical Project. Today, we've got Dylan Stein on as our guest. Dylan is someone that I kind of met through the grapevine, through the circle of friends that I've been around. And Dylan's based out of South Dakota currently, but that's not necessarily where his hunting journey started. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit, talking about some mule deer hunting, some bow setup, and kind of get into the weeds here with Dylan. So, Dylan, thanks for coming on. Appreciate you making the time for me today.
Yeah, not a problem. We had a little, technical difficulty there starting out. Only
we
35 minutes of it, but it works.
we've been one click away from having a smooth podcast start for about the last 30 or so minutes with Dylan
Yeah,
here, but we got
turns
it
out I just had
figured
to get
out.
off the phone.
Oh man, we're here now though, and I've been excited to talk to you. You've been on my list of like people that I want to get on, and it's because I want to say it was probably a year ago or so is when I started following you on Instagram and kind of seeing some of your stuff, and you're kind of in a world that I've been wanting to dabble in for the longest time. Like I even as a kid, like it's just seeing some of the Western stuff and like seeing mule deer hunting in particular, like that's always been a super big point of interest to me. And something I've been scared to dive into kind of until this upcoming season. So I want to get into that with you, but I feel like a better place for me to start is kind of where you started off at. We talked about a little bit before we got on record here that you actually grew up in Minnesota.
Yeah.
And I want you to kind of let me know how that kind of started, how your hunting route started and what that looked like then.
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern Minnesota where the whitetail hunting is absolutely terrible. I shot 2 bucks and, like, right around that Pope and Young mark, and those are big deer back there. But I mean, I started as a young age. My dad and grandpa took me out as soon as they could. I remember I was so young that I couldn't go up in a tree yet with my dad, so he'd sit me at the base of the tree while deer would come by and he'd shoot them with his bow. One time I even had a squirrel crawl in my hood and 10 minutes later he shot a buck that walked by, so that was pretty cool. But um honestly, starting out when I was little, I was a lot more into that waterfowl thing, because I could do it with friends of mine, and then kind of
Yeah.
as I got older, my dad and uncles and cousins they would all go out with my grandpa. My grandpa had been going out west to Montana. I think the first time they went out was, like, 1955 or something like that, so he had gone
Whoa.
out west mule deer hunting for well, I took him out, in 2024. He shot his last mule deer at 87, so, I mean, he had been going out there,
Wow.
for almost 70 years, so that was pretty cool. Um, and so he's kinda the one that actually got me hooked on Western hunting and took me to Nebraska when I was 12, and I shot my first mule deer there, a 3 by 3 on some public, and I kinda just got hooked from there with the whole spotting them from a distance, moving in, getting close. I was like, "This beats sitting in a tree and just waiting." And ever since then, I've been a lot more of the guy that wants to make the move rather than waiting for the deer to make the move, so, yeah, and then
For sure. Man,
I
I wanna stop you right there real quick because you said something that's so freaking like fascinating to me is that your grandpa's been going out west since 1955, uh chasing them like that. Are there, first off, that effect that he had on, your family and you clearly years later is unreal that it just stuck around like that in the family. But also, was there anything that maybe your grandpa ever told you or shared with you or like a story or something that like sticks out to you of like that was a thing in 1955, but it's not like that now, or like anything that really kind of just kind of maybe made an imprint on you?
Yeah, probably the fact that they made their own topper. I have some pictures too that we found. He just recently passed this winter, and we went through all of his photos and found some photos. They made a topper for their 1940s, 1950s pickup, and then they pulled this tiny, tiny little trailer, and they would each have 20 tags apiece, and they would just shoot a whole bunch of them and bring them all back for meat. And yeah, like just him talking about how long the drive was, and they would always sit 3 deep in the front seat, and, um, just he never hunted public land, honestly. He always hunted ranches, the same handful of ranches that whole time, and just building that relationship with those ranchers was pretty cool. I guess he never really he never really talked about it much other than the same old stories as he would always let my uncle shoot the big bucks, and then he would just take whatever's left, because that's just the kinda guy that he was. He didn't really care, but yeah, I mean, it went from hardly seeing any deer or even antelope and shooting the only ones that were there to seeing hundreds and hundreds of deer the next year and having 3 feet of snow on the ground and, just having it be brutally cold and, the deer being so froze, they would have to cut the legs off of the carcasses to be able to haul them all home, and it's just crazy times and, just the equipment that they would use, and, I would look at some racks on the
Yeah.
wall and how far did you shoot that one? Oh, it was about 250 paces. It wasn't yards or anything, it was stepping it off in paces, so, um, yeah, I don't know, that's just looking at the mule deer racks and being so fascinated by them and growing up watching all the old Eastman's VHS tapes with him and that sort of stuff is kinda what really got me hooked.
Dude, that is too cool. That's, going back that far with the tradition is I mean, that sort of thing's like that's just fascinating to me. But you grew up, sitting in stands with your dad, and you kind of got that Western bug, and you didn't want to sit for him anymore. When did you, you were growing up in Minnesota, you're in South Dakota now. Uh, was was that itch for that Western style of hunting? Is that what kind of pushed you out that way, or what ended up, kind of making that transition, that move out to South Dakota?
Yeah, I wanted to go to school in Brookings, South Dakota State University, just because I had some older friends that were currently going there. The waterfall hunting was really good. You know, the whitetail hunting was significantly better than where I grew up in Minnesota, and it was just right across the border and close to home. It was kind of that next state um that I could just hop right into and start hunting. And then I had gone on a trip West River in October and went with some friends, and they had never shot a mule deer with their bow, and we ended up getting a really nice muley, and that was my best friend that came with us also on that trip. We were like, "Dude, we gotta get back out here, like, this is just too much fun." And so, yeah, I've been doing it ever since, 2018, so it's dang fun.
Dude, that's awesome, and it's incredible what, seemingly a short distance or a not very far distance, how much of a difference it can make in the kinda country that you're in and the kinda hunting that you get to experience and, really what you get yourself into out there.
Yeah, for sure, I mean, even just I hunt all sorts of different states, and, I really don't have to travel too far to be hunting completely different country, but that's also one of the things I like about hunting out of state is getting to hunt primarily mule deer, in different habitats and trying to learn their behaviors and habits, in that landscape versus the flat, wide open prairie.
Yeah. So I'm actually planning on, and a part of the reason that I kind of crossed my mind, or I'm like, man, it's a good time to talk to you. I'm planning on, getting after my first mule deer hunt this season, and I've been just absolutely excited about it. But also, and I think pretty fairly, cautious and a little bit nervous about it because it is completely different from trying to chase whitetail. It is a different game. What was the learning curve for you like, and what were those things that maybe you picked up on that you felt like helped you become more successful chasing after mule deer once you were kind of getting into it, chasing them with a bow, getting after them? Are there anything in particular that really sticks out to you of like this was kind of the transition I had to make, or how I had to start thinking about this to start finding success chasing mule deer?
Honestly, just putting time in, I'm one guy that listens to a lot of podcasts because it either helps me, you know, rethink things in my head and remember stuff or kind of refresh my memory. But I don't know, in today's day and age, a lot of guys, they want the quickest and fastest way to success, whether that be in all aspects of life. And I think a lot of people think they can listen to a bunch of podcasts and know exactly what they're doing on their first hunt out west and go kill something big or whatever. And I'm not saying it's not true. But honestly, what it comes down to, I think, is like you just got to put the time in. And the best hunters I know that kill really quality animals are just hunting OTC style type tags or first year draw or second year draw, and just getting those tags and going as much as you can, getting the time in, not being afraid to put stocks on. And not saying to just anytime you see a deer immediately go after it. You got to assess the situation, and make sure that you can get into that and on that buck, but not being afraid to make stocks. And that's one thing I was a little hesitant on at first, is like waiting for that really exact right moment. And I have a couple friends that, man, they kill a lot of stuff and some big stuff, and they're the most aggressive people I know. And I listened to a podcast with Travis Nowotny from Goat Knives a little bit ago, and he kind of said the same thing. Like, don't be afraid to just fail at stocks. Now, always learn stuff when you get, within that 100 or 200 type distance, depending on what the landscape can give you and what you can get away with. Then really slow it down and make sure every move you're doing is um calculated and everything's quiet and slow, and not getting too close. But yeah, I would say honestly, just real world experience, man. Nothing beats it. Um, I can't even tell you how
Yeah,
many failed stocks I have, and I have failed stocks every year. It's part of bow hunting, but um, I definitely have narrowed it down a lot to knowing when the right time is to go. And then it sometimes it doesn't work out, and then I really question if I know what I'm doing. But um, that's the fun part of it, I mean, I would say
for
Get
sure.
get tags as much as you can and get as much experience as you can, and do not be afraid to mess up a stock.
You said something there that I think is really cool, and I actually, this I can't speak too heavily on this other than from my kind of own naive perspective, because this is my first year going out of state and traveling to these different places and hunting new species and doing this sort of thing. But it's just a part of my own kind of belief system around hunting in general. I've been hunting since I was a little kid. I'm coming up on took my first deer almost 20 years ago now, and being in the woods that much, I've always found that just like the more time that you can spend pursuing it, the better you're naturally going to get at it. And I like that you mentioned kind of the OTC tags, or the, single point or maybe no points or 2 points kind of draw tags that get you out, hunting again, being extremely valuable to guys being successful and killing a lot of stuff. And those are your guys that are out there getting it done, because it could have been really easy for me, and I know a couple people like this that are maybe in my shoes and have limited out of state experience or limited muley experience. I know a handful of those guys that are like, oh well, I'm putting in for this state or for this unit or for this tag, and it's going to be 8-10 points, but I'm going to be in them, it's going to be crazy. And it's like, yeah, but if you don't have the experience to take with you into that kind of a place, it might be a massive, a massive bust at the end of it. And I don't know if maybe that's kind of your take on that or your perspective on it, that those trophy units are great, but if you don't have the experience to take with you into them, doesn't mean a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, and the other thing is too, like, you maybe started putting in for that tag 5 years ago because it was really good then, but it might not be good 5 years later when you can draw it.
Mm,
That's the other thing about drawing tags that you can draw super easy. One of my friends once told me that the best tags you can have that you can draw are the tags that you can draw every year or close to it.
mm,
And because I'd rather go hunt somewhere and be able to learn that unit really good and know those deer and what they do and their habits and, all that stuff versus a unit that I can only draw every 5 or 6 years. I'm not gonna know that place near as well as something I can hunt all the time every single year. And, I mean, eventually, you're gonna spend enough time there where you're gonna figure it out, and it's really all the pieces are gonna start connecting, and all that effort and time that you've spent learning over the past few years is all gonna come together, and then you're really gonna start hitting success.
yeah. One thing that I've kind of been focusing on a lot, I would say this started last year. Um, I've been that guy traditionally where it's like, yeah, if I can, hit what I'm shooting at out to 50 yards or 60 yards or so, I'm pretty, content there. And then last year is the first year I was like, I need to be practicing at 100. Not that I'm going to be cracking off my first shot at 100, but I need to be capable and competent. And that, is continuing on into this year. And my, kind of the expectations that have been set for me so far out west is that I'm going to have to be confident to generally a lot greater distances than what I would have to be in, the Missouri whitetail woods, for example, where your average shot might be 30 to 45 yards, somewhere in that range. When you're out putting stalks on mule deer, what's that yardage or maybe that like bubble that you're trying to break into, where it's like, if I can get into this bubble, this is where I want to be trying to get a shot opportunity in, where I feel confident I'm not going to bust this, but I also know that I can make the shot that I need to make here.
I would say it's that magical 40 to 60 yard mark. Um, and obviously it depends on the terrain. Like sometimes you can get really close. Like I was just showing you, I won this longbow and I'm probably gonna take it with me this fall because I can shoot it relatively decent. And if I can find a buck where I know I can get, sub 15 yards, I'm gonna give it a shot. But typically, I've shot a handful of mule deer. Honestly, I've shot all my mule deer under 40 yards, except for the last 2 with the bow. Both of those were at 75, but I kinda don't really want to get much closer than 40 just because you get any closer than that, you're like they can visually see you a lot better. The noise is gonna be a lot more clear for them to hear. Movement is gonna seem a lot more drastic versus if you're farther away. And then, also just the sound of the bow going off or the arrow coming to them. Um, and that's one reason I try to go with the quietest setup that I can get. Um, and yeah, I mean, I don't really wanna shoot past 60, but I will if I have to.
Yeah.
If the situation is right, it's gotta be situational. Um, but yeah, I would say I try to go to, like, for surely that 40 to 50 yard mark would be the sweet spot.
Yeah. What is it? I mean, in your experience, because you've gotten to hunt both and you've gotten kind of experience with both, the idea if someone were to tell me, like, hey, Dean, you've got this season in Missouri or whatever, like, go spot a whitetail and go get within 40 yards of them and stick an arrow in them. I'm gonna need most of my season. Like I
Yeah.
can get that distance figured out if I find his bed and I find a good tree to hang in, but a pure spot and stalk, you're in some you're getting into some serious territory there with a whitetail. So what are the kind of I mean, what is it between a whitetail and a muley that kind of helps you get that distance in on a muley or kind of makes them more stalkable than what my perspective of a whitetail is?
Honestly, whitetail are just so much more cagey. Um, I would compare it like a mule deer versus, like, a lot of people say how axis deer are super cagey and on edge.
Mm,
Um, I think mule deer rely a lot on their ears, and they're pretty dang relaxed when they lay down versus, I don't know, a whitetail, they're just always so high strung, and they're always looking around a lot more. But then also, I would say the biggest difference is where they bed. Whitetail bed in spots that not every time, but 9 times out of 10, a whitetail is gonna bed in a spot that is so hard to get close versus mule deer. You know, they're typically gonna be bedded up against something on a hillside, you know, in a little washout, under a rock cliff, you know, if I'm hunting in, like, Ribbon Cliff country, um, you know, up against brush piles, stuff like that, where you can and, you know, like, the prairies where there's whitetail, you can find them where they're bedded in a brush patch, but what's around that brush patch? Probably nothing. It's gonna be
yeah,
flat. There might be a fence line, but,
yeah,
you might get lucky and they bed in, like, an abandoned grove or, like, a farmyard lot where you can use equipment to get close or stuff like that, but man, they just don't sit still, and they just always looking around where mule deer are just a lot more relaxed.
yeah, and that's an interesting thing to me, just coming from that not having hunted muley before, I'm like, the idea of, like, stocking up on them. But then you do, like, you made a good point where it's like a lot of the, just from watching videos or whatever else that you'll see online, like, the guys that are closing in on mule deer, you'll see them bedded right up against some big piece of terrain, and it's like, well, yeah, if you got the wind in your favor and everything else, you can almost come over the top of them on a lot of these situations, which you just don't get that opportunity in whitetail country most of the time.
No, I would say if you wanna get good at spotting and stalking whitetails, just buy all the whitetail adrenalines and watch those guys because they are some of the best at it, and honestly, my friend, he just bought all of their seasons, and we've been watching a lot of them because honestly, we've learned a lot from those guys, and, um
$800 later, you guys are on a marathon
Yeah,
right now.
yeah. Well, he had his kids in the winter time, so it was, like, a perfect time for him to just sit down and watch them all, but, um, honestly, I one thing I really do like about those guys is, man, they just keep it simple, like, don't
For
overthink
sure.
stuff, and that is honestly one thing I have learned that is so, so big is you can listen to all the podcasts and everything, but the biggest thing is just keep it stupid simple, and honestly, it's all for the most part, it's all common sense, like, get the wind in your face, move slow, be quiet, don't be seen,
Yep.
and, you know, only go where you're confident you can get close, and that's that, and, you know, those guys, they just keep it simple and they just grind, and, yeah, I've learned a lot from them.
You can learn a ton. I love that you brought those guys up because they are so good at what they do, and they do stalk with stick bows. They all stalk in on
Right.
whitetail, and, I mean, not only is it awesome content to watch, but it also is a shining example of, like, you know, decision making in the moment on trying to get an animal taken. And if you I can say this with confidence. Anytime that I've blown a whitetail out or I've blown a stalk, if I have tried to stalk up on one or whatever else, I knew the next step I was taking. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. And I do it and I blow it up. If you feel that way, you know, odds are
Yeah.
you got to go back to the drawing board or cut out and circle back around and just kind of rethink it. So, that sort of, the whitetail adrenaline films and stuff like that are huge on that. And I actually want to it to that same kind of point of, figuring out your decision making and your uh and kind of how you're going to go about it and go about trying to get a tag filled. For someone like me, I'm going out, I've got 1 week to go hunt. I'm going out of state somewhere I've never been before, never hunted mule deer before. What would be kind of your guiding principles or the things that you would say, like, hey, if you've got a week and you're going to a state you haven't been to before, this is how Dylan would break it down. This is how Dylan would try to go approach a situation like that on some new terrain, some new country, and trying to get a mule deer found and killed in there?
Yeah, so I would first step I would do is obviously I would look at Onyx, e-scout it, just kinda look, depending on country, I might be looking for certain types of terrain, where the public land is, what's the nearest town to that, how big is that town, what is the road systems in that country looking like, do I think I need to get off the road a ways, do I think I can hunt closer to the road? And then I would probably look at the county road map and see what roads are actually roads and what roads are not. And then I would probably, because Onyx will show you a lot of stuff that's a road that's not a road, and it'll not mark a lot of stuff that's roads. And so a lot of times you can build a route in Onyx, and I will go in and either mark what is a road or what's not a road and kind of color it accordingly. Um, depending if I wanna mark it as a lot of roads that aren't there or a lot of roads that are there that don't get shown. Um, Next thing I'm gonna do, if I can, I'm gonna try to scout in the summer. Like this year I got a tag. Never been to that area before. I do have some intel from people that have hunted it in the past. I have called some game wardens, but you kinda gotta be I would say with when you call a game warden or a biologist, they get so many phone calls. Get straight to the point, short and sweet. Don't ask too many questions. Don't try to drag it out too long and say adios because they get that from a lot of other people. But
For sure.
like this summer, I'm going to try to get down there, scout the area. Um, Honestly, just see what the country looks like in person versus on Onyx and then, kind of look at those roads a little bit, see if I can find deer while I'm there in the mornings and the evenings. During the day, that's when I'll really cover a lot of country and see what I think looks good, what doesn't look good. Cross areas out that I don't think are gonna hold deer or I don't even see deer there. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, when I go back to hunt, I'm gonna probably start out by covering a lot of country, like, I'm not gonna get too stuck up on one spot and, just move until I find the pockets of deer or the one that I'm after and, go from there.
For sure. How much time are you spending, like, let's say it's your, let's use the rut, for example. So you're in a new area around November, December, and, maybe you did your scouting or you have some previous intel and you show up. It's day 1 of your week. How much time are you spending behind the wheel and glassing around the area? How do you decide if you want to get out of the truck and maybe get up onto some terrain and go glass? Kinda how are you going through your decision-making process of you're behind the wheel versus not behind the wheel versus, actually putting boots on the ground and going somewhere?
Yeah, I would say, to start with, if there's a lot of traffic or a lot of people in that area or there's a lot of tag holders, I mean, typically all these hunts that I'm having are got a lot of tag holders. But it doesn't necessarily mean there's not deer right close to roads that you can glass up. So I'm going to start by just covering country, try to figure out where the deer are again. If it's during the rut, a lot of those deer are really starting to congregate, especially mule deer, because a mature buck will typically have a harem of does versus a whitetail. They're always one on one with a doe. And so if you're kinda looking just for those doe groups, and then if you can find doe groups, if there's any mature bucks with them, no. You can either just sit on those doe groups or come back and check them the next day or the next day. And so that's kinda what I'll do, a lot of I hunt during the rut every year, and so I'll check doe groups, and if they don't have any does, I'll just move on, and you might find a buck by himself in between the doe groups, going from one to another. But man, you'd be amazed how you can check a doe group 2 days in a row and then come back and there'll be a big buck there 3 days later, and you've checked every doe group in a 10-mile radius that you think you have at least, and he's nowhere to be found, but I heard the term once, I don't know where it was, but they call them night walkers because, dude, when it turns nighttime, those bucks just pick up and move country,
Yeah.
and, I mean, there's bucks I know of that have been shot 30 miles away the next day from where they were saw the previous day, so,
If you find a
mule
buck
deer are
on a
really covered country.
if you find a mule deer buck on a doe group, or maybe, and I don't know that you'd for sure have an answer on this one way or another, but it just piques my curiosity. If I find a white-tailed buck on a doe, I can assume he's going to be with that doe for 24 to 48 hours, and he's probably going to move on and try to find the next doe. How long is a mule deer buck, a mature buck, going to stay with the doe group maybe before he splits off and tries to find another one?
I would say it depends on the size of the doe group and how the does are acting. If the does, if they've kicked a lot of the fawns away, or if there's not many fawns, or if they're acting like if he's pushing one doe in particular, I have seen it a lot of times where they'll take that one doe and move away from the group a little ways, and they'll just have their alone time. Um, so that's another tip is like you might find a doe group, but scour that whole area right around there because he might be
Yeah.
off. If they're bedded, sometimes the bucks will bed 100, 200 yards from the does, but oversee them. Or he'll be away with a separate doe that he's going to breed. But I would say there's a good chance if you watch him and he's with them for a while and they're acting like they want to get bred, there's a good chance he'll be there tomorrow. But man, it's so tough. It really depends on what the does are thinking and what he's thinking. Like, if it's hardcore peak rut, there's a good chance he won't be there tomorrow.
Yeah. Keep
Um,
moving.
if it's earlier in the rut or later in the rut, there's a better chance he'll be there because he's kinda waiting for those does to come into heat, but, it also depends if he's got a lot of bucks that keep coming and troubling him, and he could get annoyed of it and just pick up and move all of his does to a different country, or he's gonna be gone tomorrow, so
So do you generally find it in the rut pretty mission critical that if you spot a buck with a doe group or you see a buck with his does to like try to make a move on him that day, not,
yeah.
not bide your time and just go for the stalk and go for what you can make happen, start getting a plan together.
Yeah, absolutely, especially, like, I'm an opportunity hunter, so I hunt with all weapons, muzzleloader, rifle, archery. Um, and I have done some rifle hunts in the past where you're hunting during the rut, and if you have a gun in your hand, there is no reason you shouldn't be killing that deer that day that you
Yeah.
see him. Um, Bow hunting, it can be tough getting in close with those does, but I mean, like sometimes you just gotta try to force a situation. Um, depending on the situation, but I don't know, sometimes, man, you just gotta go for it. Like that big buck I shot 2 years ago, he was in this flat antelope type country, and luckily he stayed with those does for about a week, and I was multiple times I was within that 120 yard mark, and I could just never get close because he's always pushing other bucks away or just pushing does so much and, topography wise. And I got really lucky with that buck, and that was hardcore peak rut. And when I ended up shooting him, I thought there was no chance that I was gonna get him. But I was like, I know there is a slight chance that I can get close. I gotta try to go for it and see if the topography plays out. And if it doesn't, well, I'll back out and figure it out. But I just knew, like, dude, every minute was critical in that moment because he could up and leave at any time and I'll never see him again. And especially like a bigger caliber deer like that, you really, really gotta try to make things work.
Are you trying to anticipate the movement of the group as a part of your stalk, or when you're starting your stalk, are you just trying to beeline straight towards the buck you're trying to take? Because that group could be moving, they could be shifting at any point, depending on how long your average stalk takes. Are you trying to put yourself in a position to where you think they're going to be funneling down and you're kind of heading them off, or are you just going beeline and straight for your target animal?
Yeah, I mean, it's all situational, right? In the mornings, there's probably a chance they're either coming or going from a food source, whether that be natural or agriculture. Um, or, they might be for whatever reason, sometimes the deer just like to go out in the flat, wide open country and or move, they'll be feeding out there in the evenings and stuff, and then move into the breakier country during the day, so you can kinda cut them off that way. Um, but if I could pick and choose, I would a buck by himself, I wanna sneak in, a buck that's with other deer, especially like a doe group during the rut, I think I would almost prefer to cut them off
Yeah.
because, you're way less likely to get picked off.
For sure. And that's kinda, again, that's the whitetail hunter in me where it's like, if I can get to where they're trying to go, I'd rather do that, than try to head them straight off. Because I don't know, what is the average doe group size that you'd see, if you're out west hunting muleys, what's the average doe group?
During the rut, I think it depends on where you're at. Um, Here in the Dakotas, I would say it averages between, like, probably 5 to a dozen. Um, but, like, man, sometimes in Colorado, like, in the mountains or the farther west you get, like Wyoming or Idaho, something like that, you can see doe groups that are up to, like, 20, 30.
It's
Um,
a lot of eyes on you to be putting on a direct
yeah.
stalk.
Yeah, and that's, like, one situation where you can almost, um hunt 'em like an elk then at that sense. I know a lot of guys that kill some big elk and they don't call. They blind sneak them and they come in from behind. And so I have killed a buck doing that where you kinda just come in behind them because they're watching everything in front of them, and that buck is usually pushing from behind. And sometimes you can get it where the buck will for what the buck is just so tired or whatever, for whatever reason, he was sniffing some spot for a while and wasn't paying attention, and he gets 100 yards behind the group, and then you kinda can depending on the topography, you can kinda know, like, "Now is my time, I gotta try to sneak in and kill him," or then you could even cut in between him and the does and kill him as he's coming by.
Mm, yeah, that's interesting. So we kind of talked about a little bit of, the range you're trying to get into, you stalking in on them. And so obviously that leads me to this, which I've been kind of gearing towards, and you were holding your bow as we started this. You've got to be extremely confident in your equipment. You mentioned you had something pretty interesting going on with your bow sight there. So tell me a little bit about that. What kind of gear are you taking out with you? What's your preferred setup for chasing these muleys?
Yeah, I was showing this to you a little bit earlier, but so this housing is a triple stack, single pin. It's a housing that a friend of mine has made now for a handful of years. His company is called Dark Owl Archery. And now this year he came out with his sight bar, and man, this thing, it's rad. Um, it's everything about it is metal except for the gears are like a hard polymer. It's just rock solid. I would say it's comparable to like an Excel landslide or driver, which I've shot in the past and I loved them. They didn't have that durable aspect to me that I really like because I've shot option sights in the past and those things they're a rock. I mean, they're rock solid, but they are also heavy. And this
Oh yeah.
thing's like got every this thing's got everything I want. I want my sight tape on the inside. I want indicators for all 3 of my pins. I want a good wheel on the side, but I also want good tension where I can leave this thing unlocked and slide it, and I don't have to worry about it moving on its own. Um, yeah, like I said, it's just bulletproof and rock solid, and I mean, it's made right here in South Dakota, and it's hard to beat for sure.
That's awesome. That's kind of the newest iteration of that site then?
Yeah, so this is his 1st gen sight bar. Honestly, I don't really know what you would advance on it more. He's been working on it for about 5 years. and taking kind of the best of everything from all sites and putting them into one. Um, and I know he's put a lot of time into it, and the reason he did it is I don't he's very hard on his equipment, and he's like,
As am I.
yeah,
If you bow hunt, outside of like a few weekends a year, if you're someone that really gets after it, you start figuring out what can't keep up pretty fast.
yeah, and so he's like, "Screw it, I'm just gonna build a site that I want and think should be on the market." It's kinda like, components right now for arrows, how for a long time, arrow components for outserts and collars and stuff have just kind of been soft or kinda, weak or junk in a sense, some people might say.
Mhm.
And so now you're seeing, like, Podium Archer and CMI and even Easton stepping up the game for,
Absolutely.
custom arrow components because it's like, everybody knows it, why is nobody making it?
It's
So,
not being addressed.
that's
What's your buddy's
yeah.
name?
His name is Cody Kress. The archery company is Dark Owl Archery.
Dark Owl Archery. So does he have a website or a link to that site in that sidebar?
So yeah, he there I can get you a link that I can send over to you. I
For
think
sure.
it's just Dark Owl Archery on Instagram. Dark Owl Archery for his website, and there's another thing I should touch on, like his housings. So I just went basic. It's just a matte gray, but you can get a matte color. I mean, he'll pretty much do any color that you want, and if you want it to be matte or oxidized or anodized, and then I mean, he does logos for people, topography, like sayings. I mean, you can do pretty much whatever you want. Like Remy Warren just gave away a bow with one of his sights on it,
Oh,
and
that's
it
pretty
was
cool.
I think it said, like, "We the People" with, like, a flag on it or whatever, so, like, that's one thing people really like about his stuff is that you can make it really customizable,
Yeah.
and he's sold a ton of just site housings because they 'cause they're compatible with pretty much every site on the market.
Yeah, I'm gonna have you put me in touch with him because I'd love to have him on the podcast as well and just kind of talk about that stuff and get into that because as much as I am a bow hunter, I'm an archery geek and that sort of thing gets me really excited. So I'd love to have a
Yeah.
chat with him on him.
Yeah, super good guy, super good company, and it's fun supporting your buddy, local, let alone it being your buddy, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, man. Yeah, the hunting, the bow hunting and archery community and all that stuff at large, it becomes a very, very small world. You're like one or two people away from just about everybody. And that's the exact
Yes.
kind of thing that I love learning on the podcast from all the people that I get to meet and talk to. Um,
Yep, for sure.
so you've got a banging sight on there. That's actually really cool, and I'm glad you showed that off because that's something that excites the crap out of me. But beyond that, how are you setting up the rest of your bow? What kind of bow are you shooting? Poundage, arrows, broadheads. Let's get into the weeds of your perfect preferred bow setup for going out and doing what you're doing.
So I'm shooting a Matthews lift, 33, 70 pounds, 29.5 inch draw. The arrows I was shooting last year, 420 grains. I was shooting about 300 feet a second with those. I just got the Matthews two-piece quiver on there, the Hamsky Epsilon, and then my stabilizer is Titanium Archery Products is the company name. He's a smaller guy, I think, out of the Northwest country. Um, So I'm running like a 12-inch bar out the front on that with I don't know, I couldn't even tell you, I don't know, probably like 4 or 5 ounces, something like that,
Sure.
with a 10 degree on it. Um, let's see, I, shoot the True Ball short and sweet release. I'm a wrist strap guy
Oh yeah.
because I've lost handhelds before in the woods, and this way, if the release isn't strapped to my wrist, it's strapped to the riser of my bow, and I know it's gonna always be there. And I found it to be easier to hold my bow back for longer periods if I need to, because I can have my hand be relaxed. And, I also had target panic at one point too, so that is, another reason I went with the wrist strap again, but It's also easier to command shoot if I need to shoot right now while this deer, elk, or something's gonna step into this narrow window, and it's not gonna completely mess with my anchor point. Um, Man, as far as arrows go, I mean, I save an arrow from every year that I've ever hunted, and I label on the fletching what year it was. And as I look around, there was only one arrow that was the same 2 years in a row, and I honestly like to mess with them a little too much, and my friends know that, and I got all sorts of different fletchings and configurations and all that, and I like to mess with it too much, but and then that James Yates guy came out with that arrow study, and it just sent me into a spiral, and, what I'm gonna go with, though, this year is I'm gonna do a 3 fletch in the Flex Fletch, FFP 300s. Um, Probably do a 2-degree offset. I'm gonna do a wrap on those. I did learn that putting a wrap on your arrow is gonna help it when you wanna switch fletchings up and
For
not have to
sure.
continue to buy new arrows. And then I'm gonna shoot for that 440 to 460 range. I'll probably be right in the middle at, like, 450. I'm still building them. But I'll be shooting the Easton Axis 4 mils. You know, when it comes to arrows, Easton Axis are hard to beat, and Victory, like, RIP
Great.
TKOs or VAP TKOs are really hard to beat, and I know guys that shoot a lot of stuff and they'll use gold tips or whatever, and it's honestly kinda just whatever you trust, and, um, I don't wanna get too light of a GPI because your arrow can get a little weak then with a thinner wall, but I'll probably be running a Sever again, maybe a Beast. Since I'm shooting 4 mil, I don't like outserts. I think outserts are stupid because they weaken your arrow. That's my personal preference. So I'm running the Deep Six hit inserts on those, and last year I ran the Deep Six 2-inch Sever. I've shot Severs for a lot of years and have had good success with them.
Great broadheads,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and so I also like you might learn this if you're using something else, but one thing I like about the Severs that I'll touch on quick is their blades are fully enclosed in the shaft like a Sever or a Schwacker. And so the blades, like when you're spotting and stalking where there's lots of grass or whatever, your blades cannot catch on stuff and open up,
Mm.
because they're completely inside. So that's one thing I like. But yeah, I'll probably either shoot those, in a 125 head or a Beast Deep Six, 2-inch. Kinda just depends. I don't really know what I'm gonna do yet since I'm elk hunting this year. I might run the 1.5 hybrid Deep Sixes, but we'll see.
But for a
And I might
Western
throw
guy, it sounds like you're pretty partial to expandables, which is
Yeah,
refreshing. Refreshing to hear.
yeah, I mean, I know I met Joel Maxfield through Hunter,
Yeah.
and the only time Joel ever is shooting a fixed blade is, like, right now when he's in Africa shooting big game, big bone animals. But man, that guy has shot everything under the sun, and he shoots a lot of critters, and he's always using expandables, he's using light arrows, shooting fast, ripping through stuff like no tomorrow, and, I mean, the proof honestly is kind of in the pudding, and the technology is so good nowadays, I don't think there's any reason you shouldn't be shooting an expandable. The
Yep.
only time I think you should possibly be shooting a fixed blade is like a bison or something big somewhere else. Or like the whitetail adrenaline guys where you might be shooting
Yeah.
through a lot of grass and stuff like that. Other than that, if you're gonna be shooting over 40 yards, you for sure should be shooting an expandable. Some guys will argue with me on that for elk. I've been with a handful of elk that have been killed with a Sever 1.5, and I mean they die within 100 yards, and I know
Yep.
guys that shoot a lot of elk with the evolution hides and have really good blood trails on elk, watch them die well within sight, and no problem whatsoever, so that's yeah, I'm a expandable guy at heart for sure.
Agree. I shot the beast last year to test them out. I was super happy with how they performed. Super super sharp broadheads. This year I'm thinking I'm gonna end up shooting some Grim Reapers. I've had great success with them in the past. I've never had a failure with them. I've had them save my butt on a deer or two previously, and I tend to enjoy them. They just seem kind of like a reliable, almost like a home option where it's like, I've ran them before. I'm comfortable with them, and I tend to kind of favor them a lot in a lot of scenarios. But I do appreciate one of the things you mentioned with the severs where it's enclosed because I didn't really think about it. I'm not stalking whitetail out here in Missouri. I'm usually setting up trying to get them in a bedding area. So that is something to consider is going out stalking mule deer. If I'm going to be crawling through grass and I've got an arrow knocked and ready to go, do I want one of those blades to catch some grass or something and flip out? That's a super important thing that you hit on there because that's something that guys that maybe are going on their first out hunt out west, that are going to go stalk mule deer for the first time or do whatever. One of those options that you think is kind of a no-brainer answer for you, you might have to think twice about it or consider some extra factors that you don't consider back at home.
Yeah, and honestly, I've had first-hand experience on that blade catching on grass and opening. That was with a Rage no collar. I'm not gonna knock Rage at all. They're a great broadhead. I have friends that have tons of success with them. I just think the no collar is very stupid if you're gonna be hunting west,
Yeah.
western species because, dude, that thing cost me a big mealy because the blade caught on some grass and I wasn't comfortable shooting that far with the blade being open. And I mean, I even shot a deer earlier that year with one, and yeah, every time I'd move my bow while I was sitting there waiting for him to stand up, I mean, the slightest little blade of grass would catch it and open it. I'm not saying all rages are like that, especially the ones with the collars, because they're definitely not, but you're gonna be a lot more prone to your blades catching and opening on stuff versus blades that are fully enclosed like a Sever or Schwacker.
Yeah, I no, that's such a great point that you brought up because that's something I wouldn't even consider, that wouldn't even be like a factor in my mind, uh, you know, Missouri whitetail hunting, but going out west, like I should probably consider either different broadheads or
Yeah.
having a different system going if I'm gonna go do that. I wanna ask you this question because it's something that, I love getting into this sort of thing with people, and you're in a different part of the country doing some different stuff. Um, is there any hunt that sticks out to you maybe in recent time or so that you feel like is a good example of everything that you are capable of as a bow hunter? Like this hunt, the way it went down or the way that you got it done, it's like I felt like this is a good demonstration of what I'm fully capable of.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a little every single hunt a little bit, in its own way. Um, like the buck last year I shot with my bow, that one was at 75 yards. I was capable of making that shot in that situation because there was little to no wind, broadside, I was calm, collected. Um, the buck I shot with my rifle last year on the rifle trip that some buddies and I did, man, we grinded it out for 6 days seeing little deer, but I knew, like, we just had to keep covering country, and eventually we're gonna run into some bucks, and I think we might have found the only 3 shooter bucks in that whole entire area that we were hunting in that place, but, we got her done, and persistence kills, it really does, and, that looking back on it all, the one thing that sticks out to me with every single deer is just persistence. I've definitely gave up at times with that buck that I shot 2 years ago. I wanted to so bad, and I hunted them all fall, and I didn't I hunted them for basically 3 months, and, I mean, I just kept staying persistent, got in my head a little bit at times, but I knew I just gotta stay focused, but also having fun, that's another big thing is, like, you can be serious with it, but man, at the end of the day, it's just a deer or it's just an antelope or an elk, whatever. It's different if it's a, once in a lifetime type animal, but you just gotta have fun,
Yeah.
um, not sweat it too much. And I would say that's another big thing that I've learned, but I would say persistence with them all is probably what sticks out the most.
No, I love that, man. That's a great answer to that question. That persistence kills. Yeah, it couldn't have hit the nail more on the head there. Um, Man, if you were to leave, we're kind of getting towards the end here and wrapping it up. So there's a question that I like to ask everybody when I remember. If you were to hand out one piece of advice to anybody, maybe it's someone that's like in my shoes going on their first out west hunt. Maybe it's someone that, is experienced. But if you were to leave them with one piece of advice for getting out there and getting after them, what would that advice be?
Um, Honestly, it takes more than one thing to get it done. So I would say, if I was gonna name just 5 quick things, it would be confident in your setup and what you're doing. Don't be afraid to make stalks and just make smart choices when you do it. Have fun, know your effective range, and, the 5th one would probably be, mm, do it with friends, man. We're only here once, and honestly, I hunt by myself a lot, but I have the
Yeah.
absolute most fun when I do it. Buddy hunts. That's what some of my friends like to call 'em is their buddy hunts, and some hunts are meant for you to do by yourself, and some hunts are meant for you to just have fun and have a blast with buddies, and you kinda gotta know when to plug and play a little bit, but I guess I could also say just get the tag and go, man, like,
Yeah.
don't
Man,
sweat don't
I like
sweat the
that you
process too much.
I like that you said that because I've hunted alone. Well, I'd say 90% of my hunts the last few years, but man, the ones that always stick out to me are the buddy hunts, and they're also the hunts where maybe I did the hunt alone, but I got somebody out there with me for the recovery, and like just that little bit of camaraderie at the end of it all, man. Those hunts they kind of hold a little bit more weight in your memory than any of the solo hunts do.
Yeah, when you have buddy hunts and one of you puts an animal down on the ground and you can have a celebratory Coors
Oh yeah.
while you're cutting them up, I mean, nothing really beats that, so, um, yeah, I don't know, a lot of people try to overthink things and get too serious about it, but man, we're just here to have fun and shoot stuff and, do it, make memories with people as well as learning stuff on your own because you do learn a lot more when you hunt by yourself.
Yeah.
But then what you learn, you can go and put on the plate to help others be successful. And last year I helped a handful of buddies get on elk and deer and that sort of thing. And it feels really good to help others. I mean, I enjoy that just as much as getting on something myself.
I couldn't agree more, man. That's kind of brings us just to what it's all about, and I kind of see that as that full circle moment. Back to your grandpa and him being out there in 1955, and letting your uncles or whoever else shoot before he shoots and all that. It seems like some of that stuff carried over in the bloodline where you're just as happy getting other people on animals. That's definitely cool to see. But Dylan,
Yeah.
man, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute blast talking to you. I'd love to get you back on sometime during season and as you start having some more successes and get to talk about those stories too.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully this season's not too overwhelming with the tags I have and my daughter being due in December, but I know the hunt that you're going on, you're definitely gonna deal with some frustration, but you're also gonna have a lot of fun because of our mutual friend that you're going with. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll definitely stay in touch for sure, and I'm definitely glad to help you out any way I can because I don't know, some people like to be secretive and hush hush about it, but I also like to help others too because I like to see other people be successful. So,
Oh, buddy, you'll be getting Snapchats of us out there, whether we're having success or not. You're gonna get to see the story unfold.
yeah, that's for sure. There's always lows and highs of everything, and usually everybody sees the both ends of that spectrum.
Oh yeah, we'll be keeping you up with it all, man. But thanks again for coming on. Thank you guys for listening today, and we'll catch you on the next one. I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode of the Non-Typical Project. If you're interested in our special guest, their information, as well as my information and our sponsors' links are all going to be down in the description below. If you guys could, be sure to leave a positive review for the podcast as it helps me out a ton. If you got any questions or anything that caught your eye during this podcast, you can leave a comment down below and I'll be sure to get back to you as quick as possible. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys next week.